Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Tnrd Policy Review Committee meeting for Friday, January 21st, 2022. Call this meeting to order, and I would like to acknowledge that we connect with many First Nation communities across our vast regional district, and today are located on Tk'emlúps-te-Secwepemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The Tnrd appreciates the partnership that we have with Tk'emlúps-te-Secwepemc and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. Our first item of business is the deferral of election of committee chair and vice chair, and I will ask General Manager Campbell to report on this item.
Thank you, Chair Sinclair. Typically, we would be electing a vice chair and chair at the beginning of each year. But given the unique start time of this policy review committee, I believe the committee met for the first time in June. We haven't really had the opportunity to have the chair and vice chair in their positions for a full year. We also are looking at, since we're still having some electronic participation, we're also looking at using a new voting platform for those who are participating via Zoom. So we would just request that we defer election of the chair and vice chair to another time.
I'll make that a motion.
Thank you very much. All in favor? Looks like that's anybody opposed? That's carried. Thank you. I have no announcements. Are there any additions to or deletions from the agenda? Going once, going twice. I see none. Motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. And then we have the minutes from our last meeting, September 22nd. Moved by Director Schaefer.
Second.
Second by Director Kershaw. Any comments or questions? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you. So the first, I guess, meaty item to discuss is a policy review update. And again, I will pass it over to our General Manager of Corporate and Legislative Services.
Thank you, Chair Sinclair. Just wanted to provide the Policy Review Committee with an update on the ongoing policy work. So as this committee is aware, there's been a number of board policies that have been updated, new policies approved, and as well as a number of new policies in development, thanks to the work of this committee. And we also just wanted to let the committee know that there's some parallel work happening among senior management and staff with a review of our administrative policies. So those are our corporate level policies, and we will continue to provide this committee with updates on progress with that review. And just related to that as well in the board policies, and I mentioned this in the report that was brought to the board yesterday, that in addition to the policy work that we're doing, staff really want to put an emphasis on knowledge and understanding of policies and the expectations associated with what's required of a policy. And so we are really looking at training and development in those areas. And then as also was mentioned yesterday, we have put together a draft Tnrd policy framework. And I was going to move it. It's not working. Well, pointed at Dave. No. Oh, there we go. Great. So really excited about this document. It's in draft form right now, and we're hoping to bring it to the Policy Review Committee in March. It's currently been sent to senior management to get their input and feedback on it, but basically it's to guide our policy work. It outlines the Tnrd policy goals, and just a note that this applies to both administrative and board policies. So outlines our policy goals, provides a number of definitions and terms, including the differences between administrative policies and board policies. It outlines the policy process, the policy approval process, when we should be doing policy reviews and how often, what the process is for amending policies, and the roles and responsibilities of those who are updating, reviewing, and amending policies. So stay tuned for that in March. As the board was updated yesterday by Mr. Hildebrand, we have a number of recommendations from BDO in response to the forensic audit report. And we've begun working on that. And we've already, as Mr. Hildebrand noted yesterday, have addressed some of those recommendations. But in response to the recommendations and the work required, we're proposing to create a staff level working group to be able to coordinate and execute, lead the execution of the BDO recommendations. While a number of the BDO recommendations will result in policy updates and changes, a lot of them are not just related to policy. There'll be changes in practices. They might have staffing resource implications. So it's a bit broader, broader than policy work. But we'll be keeping this committee obviously updated, and the committee will see a number of policies brought forward as a result of those recommendations. So some of the priority areas that will be coming to this committee going forward, as well as being reviewed by the senior management team in terms of administrative policies and board policies, a focus on contracts and procurement. We will have a new procurement policy, and I hope to bring that to this committee to review in March. Along with that, we'll have a new delegation of authority bylaw. And we're also looking at a new contract execution process. So the bylaw and the process are tied in with the procurement policy. Looking at finance and expenses, we'll be looking at an updated credit card policy, updated meal and travel expense policy, and updated business expense policy, ethical conduct and conflict of interest. And we're hoping to bring this to the March committee meeting as well, an updated employee code of conduct policy, which covers ethical conduct as well as conflict of interest. And we are still working on an anti-racism and anti-racial discrimination policy and program. And in terms of privacy and security, we're looking at an updated privacy policy and new security and data breach policy. And those are all the updates. Is any questions?
Thank you, General Manager Campbell. Any other questions for Ms. Campbell or in general? Director Rothenberger.
Well, once again, I'll just ask my question that seems to be coming up every meeting. I raise it in regards to transparency and what initiatives you see there and what new policies might be coming forward.
Through the chair to Director Rothenberger, transparency in terms of like specific, I know you brought up at the meeting yesterday around expenses.
Yeah, specifically to do with that one.
Yeah, I don't know if we're going to incorporate that actually into an actual policy, but I know Mr. Ray is online right now. Maybe he can speak to that, what he plans to do.
Sure. Thanks. I've been looking at what is the most practical way to pull those reports together for the board and the public. There's a couple initiatives I'm looking at. The most immediate one is I believe I've got some reports that I can create in our VATM accounting system that summarize the expenditures in general, who we've paid and how much. I've compared that report with what CSRD, for example, provides its board. That's the report they've been providing, and I propose to do the same thing. So that the question that I would have is that we need to work through is, do I provide that to the board only, or do we potentially put it up on our website and let anyone see that monthly report? That would provide the most transparency. That would list out who we're paying and how much, without necessarily a lot of the detail about what it was paid for, but who we're paying and how much. Then there's a second report that breaks down the expenses by person. So what I was thinking of doing was putting together a quarterly report that would list out the expenses of each of the board members, as well as each of the management team. There's a little bit more to that because the VATM report doesn't contain all the information. So there's a couple of different sources I would need to pull the information from. and probably compile it into a report, created in Excel. But that was the other thought I had, was to present something like that on a quarterly basis, which again is consistent with what I was seeing CSRD doing, and that could be part of the board meeting agenda. We could also just post it on the website for people to see if they wish. And then the other piece I was looking at, there's a piece of software I've been looking at, and I've got to go through a procurement process to determine whether that's the right software, or if there's another equivalent sort of tool out there that might work equally well at a better price. But what it does is it works with our budget numbers once they're approved by the board, and it interacts with our VADM system to pull out the actual results, as of the day before. And it's a web access. So you would a member of the public could find it through a link on our website, and it would give a dashboard type presentation of different things that we could customize or create in terms of what our budget to actual results look like. And there's also a login feature, so things like the board could log in and see perhaps a different set of parameters. If there's a finance committee, maybe that's more detail. If it's managers, maybe they get a different dashboard, but it's very customizable that way. So I'm looking at putting something like that in place as well. And I think between those three things, it covers off a lot of the reporting that is being asked for. But up until now, I've been kind of working on what's possible. How do we do it without it being very manual and labor intensive, and that it's timely and accurate? And then the next steps I was going to go through really was bouncing it off of board members to see if it's going to meet your expectations, or if you think something more is needed. Because I want to design something that everyone is on the same page, that it's meeting what we want to do in terms of transparency, timeliness, accuracy, and content. So that's where I'm at with that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, Chair, that's sounding very good to me, because I think what we want to get at here is an easy way for the public to access information about our expenses, so they don't have to go through an FOI or make special requests for staff to dig up that kind of information. And it seemed to me that the logical way to do that, or the logical way of providing that access, would be to post it on the website, to present the report as usual through our regular board meetings. But to be able to get at some of the detail and not just generalities. I think people deserve to know how much we're spending on meals, and how much we're spending on mileage, and how much we're spending on hotels, and everything else that the board in particular expenses, and also, of course, senior management. So I like the sound of the direction that Mr. Ray is going in. When do you suppose that we could expect something concrete to be put in front of us for consideration?
Well, the first two reports, the first one I was talking about with the who we pay and how much, I was thinking we could have one for the February meeting, or I could send something out earlier that would just encapsulate January 2022 to begin with, and then just proceed with it on a monthly basis. The one that lists out the expenses by board member and by management is a little bit more manual, bringing things together. As I said, CSRD is putting it together on a quarterly basis. That makes sense to me, but I could potentially do something just capturing January to put in front of you so that you'd see the look and feel of it, the content, the level of detail, and be able to provide me with feedback so that we can proceed with it perhaps on a quarterly basis following that. I just haven't had a chance to kind of bounce some of this stuff off of CAO Hildebrand to make sure he's happy with it before I was taking it to the board. And then the more of the dashboard thing, like I said, I've got to go through a procurement process. It's not a inexpensive piece of software. And so there would have to be the proper procurement process followed to make sure we're following best practices there. So, and that would take a little bit more time for installation, customization of the reports, training. So, my hope would be, sometime mid-year this year.
Thank you, Mr. Ray.
Thank
Any
you.
further questions, Director Rothenberger?
No, thank you.
Thank you. And I have a list of speakers here, Director Schaefer, followed by Director Brown and Director Stamer. Director Schaefer.
I just, maybe this isn't the place for it, but it's concerning communication with the public, not to do with the board expenses or anything, like that, but just ordinary everyday communication with the public. I don't know if it's policy or if it's a discussion we can have at a later date to come up with better communications, because we don't have good communication. When something's going wrong, like in Vavenby, the fire department's having a problem, communication is really bad and we need to be better at that.
Thank you, Director Schaefer. Sorry, CAO Hildebrand or Ms. Campbell, do you have a response to that?
Sure, I can start and then maybe Ms. Campbell would like to jump in, but that's certainly something that we're working on. We've got a new manager of communications and marketing. He has done some really great work and will continue to do that. So I know with him and with our general manager of HR and communication or people and engagement, they're working closely to provide a better product going forward. So I'm not sure we need a policy, but I think a discussion perhaps, but I'm sorry, we do have one. I'll let Ms. Campbell maybe speak to that.
Thank you. Yeah, we do actually have one, and it has been identified as a policy that needs updating. So I will pass this on to our general manager of people and engagement. And I know she has it flagged for a future policy review committee meeting to bring it forward.
Thank you. I see Director Rothenberger has his hand up again, but I'm going to go to Director Brown next and then Director Stamer.
I guess I have a couple of comments regarding the transparency of only our expense account, especially when we're looking at mileage, accommodation, and hotels, as Director Rothenberger referred to, because it really targets those people that live out of town rather than ones who don't live out of town. Obviously, their expenses will be bigger. If any expenses are going to be put into the public, which I don't have a problem with, but I want it attached to the purpose, the meetings, whatever. That makes sense to me. But just publishing it without that backup information does not make sense to me. I also would like to look at these expenses could also be reviewed by our audit committee, but we don't have an operations committee. We don't have, audit is strictly audit. Their team's terms of reference need to be reviewed. And it's easy enough to put operations and attach it to the audit committee because they're already looking at financial reporting. But I think it's essential that if we're looking at something like this, that we have an operations review in order to do that before we do start posting it all over. So that's just my 2 cents worth.
Thank you, Director Brown. I see some nodding heads there. If anyone would like to respond, but I think your comments have been noted there. So next on the speakers list, I have Director Stamer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hope you can hear me okay. This is a question through to Ms. Campbell. she was mentioning in her report about the privacy bylaws. Can she elaborate a little bit more on what we are looking at, timeline, and what's that going to encompass?
Through the chair to Director Stamer. So we do already currently have a privacy policy, so it's really focused on our collection, storage, and dissemination of any personal information that we collect through our various services and programs. But this policy is extremely outdated. It hasn't kept up with the changes in legislation. So it's really just an update to tighten it up.
Okay, and
Director
if I may,
Steamer,
a follow-up, and where does
Director Steamer,
Yep.
we're having a hard time hearing you.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
My follow-up question, if I may, was, and where does information that is released to the board, where does that lie in the privacy policy? To Ms. Campbell. Hello.
Just taking a moment.
Did you get me?
I did,
I'm
yes.
sorry.
yeah.
Okay.
You're asking about information that's given to the board. Where does that fall
Yep.
within?
Yeah, and specifically closed meeting material.
Yeah, so I mean, we don't have a policy on closed meetings, and that's typical in most local governments because closed meetings are governed by the legislation. And so, of course, anything brought forward to a closed meeting, unless the board resolves otherwise, remains in a closed meeting, including any documents or decisions.
Well, the reason if I may, the reason I'm bringing it up is because, we just got a new piece of information, and as for like the municipality of Barrier, we are not allowed to have any closed meeting information to leave the room. You don't get to see it the day before. You don't get to take it home. It is done at the meeting at the time, and then it is returned to the administration. So I'm just saying that maybe we should be having a discussion with the rest of the board and what they think about that. So that's kind of where I was leading to that, is that District of Barrie, we have a policy. You don't get to take anything home. You don't see it beforehand. It's in yellow and it's at the board, it's at our room, and it doesn't leave the room. So the reason I'm bringing it up is I think it's time for us to look at that. Thank you.
Through the chair to Director Stamer, absolutely. And when we were doing our research and looking at other regional districts' policies, we did note that there were some that did have a closed meeting policy that outlined exactly what obviously the District of Barrier is following. So I think we can certainly bring something like that forward to the Policy Review Committee for input and then take it to the board.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Steamer. I am going to go to Director Quinn next, as we're going through a first round of speakers, and then I'll go to Director Rothenberger.
Thank you, Chair. I just was going to comment on expenses. I have no problem with recording them if that's the desire of the board. And I say that knowing I usually have the highest, but I'm kind of paranoid about those, and I always sit down with Mr. Ray and go through it to make sure I've done it correctly, because I'm always a target. That's why it's a big red spot on my back. But anyway, that's kind of where I have absolutely no concern about that. The only challenge that I see there is that if we need to stay over, I phone Katie and she makes the arrangements. I don't do it on my own card. So how we translate that cost to that expense account would be something that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Good point, Director Quinn, and I'm sure that Mr. Ray is noting that as well. So finally, we have Director Rothenberger for a second time.
Thanks. Just a couple of quick follow-ups. It sounds like Director Stamer is actually talking about something that is currently the practice but isn't in policy, because that's been a long-standing practice not to allow confidential documents out of closed meetings. But also in regards to Director Schaefer's comment about a need for a review of our communications with the public. For those who weren't on the board last time, might not know that we we went through a very rigorous exercise in creating a very detailed communications policy. And I chaired that committee and initiated it. And I think it's a good policy. I think maybe the issue might be in the way it's being applied or not applied. And so I think it is a good idea to reopen that policy in its entirety, and for the board to become familiar with it and to update it where necessary. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Rothenberger. And with that, we've got a busy agenda, so I'd like to move on to item 6.2, Building Regulations Bylaw 2066, from someone we have seen a lot of today already, Ms. Sadilkova.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't know if I should apologize, but I do not have any PowerPoints for any of this. I put in what we needed to say, I think, in the reports. So there's two policies. The first round have all to do with building. One is a revision to a longstanding, another revision to a longstanding policy. And the reasons are the policy as it is drafted now, which was passed in 2010. We are just so busy. We are not keeping up with the word of that policy. And yeah, it's not a bylaw, it's a policy, but it absolutely is a liability. So, and I'm dealing with one of a matter we have before the courts that has to do with a building. And we're having to defend why we didn't require the whole building to be torn down, the house, rather than just putting the notice on title. In this case, we're fine, but I can see in future cases, whatever, don't have a policy unless you're prepared to follow it, policy or bylaw. And that's like any local government anywhere. What the drafts you have before you, and I'm sorry, I didn't do track changes in these ones because there were so many changes. Both policies have been to our Municipal Insurance Association for their review, because there's a lot, building results in a lot of litigation. I mean, we're not a municipality, so it's not trip and falls. It's other things, and building is a big one. So again, the purpose is that this will clarify for staff when we take section 57s to the board, and when they include just a notice on title versus a notice on title and legal action. So the keys, and I'm speaking to the first policy, so that would be the revised policy of 2010. It's policy number 9.1.1. Basically, with each case, and I've already started doing that on the section 57 reports I'm preparing, I review what is the greater risk. Is this a building where the public is being invited into the building and there's no building permit or no occupancy, or there may be life safety in those? Because to go through the legal action, we need to have the staff time and we need to have the legal budget. And if we were to follow the current policy to the letter of the policy, I mean, you can double or triple your legal budget, and we'd need more staff because we have to marshal it through. We can't just hand these off to lawyers. So in this case, we would be scrutinizing each one. So for example, the one yesterday where the homeowner spoke as a delegation, in that report, I'd set out why I didn't think it needed legal action. Even if it was just a couple sentences, that's because I was already trying to follow the new policy. So and these policies are becoming more critical because, like I showed with the file size of building permits, the sophistication of the public and the real estate industry is such that we are getting, and plus all the sales that have been going on page 2 of the report, you see how many building information requests we've responded to. So because of those building information requests, they want to know if a building's been being complete, if the permit's been completed, if the building has been issued an occupancy certificate, or if it was like Director Elliott said, all those houses that have no, they sold as a property with a dwelling and a revenue, detached garden suite. Well, if there was no building permit for it, that comes out as part of the building information request. These are all public. So as we do those, the information comes out more often than say 10 or 20 years ago, and we got far fewer building information requests. Now they're absolutely routine. Sometimes they're not routine with a homeowner is selling, but if there's a real estate realtor or lawyer involved in it, then they come out. Also, if you look at the table on page 3, you'll see right around, we've sort of picked up steam since about 2010. We've gotten busier and busier with permits. I think more people today are getting building permits and are getting occupancy, because again, that's just the way of financing and legislation. But you'll see at about 2014, we really dropped off with how many Section 57 reports we were taking to the board. And that is a function of, that's when we started getting hit with staff reductions. So a lot of the senior inspectors have all retired since then. We have a completely new contingent of building inspectors. Most of them are green, not all, but you see in 2021, that number went up to 14. And that's because I've just started to do them out of a sense of panic for risk. And but at the same time, we've seen in the numbers of released notices on the last table, that 5 should actually be a 6. So we have 6 or 7 released from title on a steady basis. There are cases, and I'd say it's about 10%, where it'll never be released unless the building is removed. And that would have been, for example, the one we're in litigation on now through our insurers. So speaking to the fact sheets, the 2 frequently asked question sheets, I prepared those because I got tired of repeating myself. So we share those. Those are public. They're on our website. So people have a better understanding. Because in a municipality where they control water and sewer, you're much less likely to get a house built without a permit than you are in a rural area. And the second, the new policy, and this will be my last speaking point, it's attached at the very end of this report, starting on page 16 of your agenda. It doesn't have a number. So this policy, this 2-page policy, really guides us on releasing those Section 57s from title, because of course, they don't need to go to the board for release. They only need to go to the board for registering them on title, and that's because of natural justice and procedural fairness, that the landowner or homeowner deserves a kick at the board, at the decision makers on those notices. But if they meet the code and the bylaw, we can't and we wouldn't refuse to discharge or release the notice from title. So this, I'm not going to read the whole thing. There was a lot of input from MIA on this. It's written in fairly plain speak, and it really spells out in detail, well, probably maybe too much detail, but they wanted this detail. It spells out what we're already doing. And I think that's all I have to present on this. I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation and your conscientiousness, Ms. Sadilkova. Were there any questions? I have Director Quinn up first.
Thank you. Through to Director of Planning, Manager of Planning. On policy number 9.1.1, in the second paragraph, second sentence, it says, as building staff have become less qualified by BOADC and permit volumes and complexity, there's less time to available to enforce. are we leaving ourselves open to any kind of liability by having less qualified people?
Of course we are. Of course we are, but we've had postings, and we're not the only ones who've had postings pretty well nonstop for the last 2 years. There are all, with the changes in the Building Act and with the mass retirement, when they brought in the Building Act in 2015, we complied with everything that was in there. But by February of 2021 last year, when the last stage of it took effect, we absolutely didn't. Because all, like the rest of the province, all those level 3 inspectors were in their 50s. So they've all gradually retired. We used to have one, what I say green inspector, they might be a level 1, or they were working towards their level 1. We had one of those for 6 level 3 RBOs, registered building officials. Now we have 1 part-time and 1 full-time RBO. And we have 2 building inspectors in training that we've just recently hired, that we're not releasing them upon inspections, but we're bringing them through the system so they're getting a lower pay, and we need them to be able to do inspections by this summer. And they're doing really well. So we are addressing it, is what I can tell you, but that's a really long-winded to answer to your, is this a risk? Yeah, absolutely it is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions on this topic? And if not, there are 2 motions before the committee.
Move number 1.
Director Kershaw, seconded by Director Schaefer. And we have the second recommendation. Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. All in favor? Any opposed? No one opposed? Okay, second motion. Moved by Director Brown, seconded by Director Quinn. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That is carried as well. I think you have what you need there, Ms. Sadokova.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And our next item is the Planning and Development Policies Update. And we have a report from the General Manager of Development Services.
So I'm going to have a drink at 5 o'clock today at a local craft brewery, I would add. So we tried to be really as brief on these as possible, because the vast majority, this was part of the policy cleanup. You have 4 policy amendments and a little description of those. Most of those are just ministry name changes, legislation changes. So from private energy projects, it's now called CEP, Clean Energy Projects. This is just what happens with politics. So again, that's a cleanup. There is the policy with the most substantive changes is our consultation and development application processing. If you recall, especially you, Director Quinn, we were going to put some words in there about public information meetings, especially when we've got interest or controversy. So we've added a section in that. The other policy where so that was the public information meeting. Public hearings. That's the last one in the attachments and amendments. So it's policy 13.3.1. So we always, since 98, we've had a policy about public hearings, because before 1998, the poor corporate officer or myself had to sit and read every word of all submissions before the board. Then that changed, where we made sure, and we've tried to be really prompt about distributing them to the board ahead. So we try to not put them just in your blue folders. We try to email them at least a day or 2 ahead, right, Director Rothenberger? That was, so we've pulled that, to pull that deadline up, but sometimes we get correspondence. We've gotten correspondence from neighbors before somebody even makes an application, never mind if there's first and second reading of a zone rezoning and then the public hearing. And then we, of course, don't take any further public submissions after the public hearing is closed. So what this policy does, and a lot of it was at the detailed scrutiny of the corporate officer, is it spells out the stages of that public input for public, and this is not just public hearings, but it's also public notices. So for variance permits, there's no hearing, but somebody may write something in to us well ahead of us even calling notice. So that maybe perhaps the board has denied it. So we don't, if somebody writes a letter ahead, we don't attach it to the report in your agenda. We've also clarified in there, so who is the correspondence addressed to? Sometimes we get emails sent to somebody else, another neighbor, and then that other neighbor sends it on to us. Sometimes they'll just address it to the Tnrd, sometimes they'll address it to the planner responsible, and sometimes they'll address it to the board of directors. Sometimes they send things directly to the board of directors as a whole, and sometimes they'll do that even before the agenda is published or the report is on the agenda. And it's one of the reasons why when we write a report, the order goes, we write the report, I review it, the CAO approves it, or no, reviews it, and then maybe approves it, usually approves it. And then the agenda is published on Thursday afternoons. Then on Friday mornings, then we send out to the applicants, or we'll send out for the public hearing, or we'll put the ads in the paper, because that is the trigger, and that's the appropriate order of things. So again, this policy spells out in detail how we handle all those possible permutations and combinations of submissions we get. And that is all of them.
Very good. Thank you again, Ms. Sedilka, for that presentation. And you've earned your beverage of choice tonight, I think. Is there any discussion? Are there any questions on these items? Director Quinn.
Well, I may be ahead of myself here on clean energy projects. Are we there yet? Okay, fair enough.
On any, I can answer questions on any of the
Okay,
policies.
on the clean energy progress, bullet 9, decommissioning, and it goes on to say that we can require. Are we required to enforce that?
No, it's administered by the province.
So then why would we have that in there?
So to prompt them to ensure that they secure or whatever
Okay.
kind of bond for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Question through to Ms. Campbell. Can we adopt this motion in one fell swoop, or do we need to do the different policies individually?
Chair Sinclair, you can do it in one fell swoop if no one proposes any changes to the policies individually.
Moved by Director Brown, seconded by Director Quinn. Any discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? That is carried unanimously. Thank you.
Okay.
And our final item of business today is policy 10.3.1, community cleanup events, proposed amendments. And we have a report coming from the General Manager of Operations. There he is.
Good afternoon, everyone. I promise this will be lighter and easier than this morning's presentation. I don't have slides, so I'm just going to give you a short verbal report, and then we can field any questions on this. So in terms of the work to review existing policies and see where updates are necessary, we've in our operations division, we started looking at at this policy and thought there were some improvements that could be made. For clarity, this policy dates back to 2014, and it does not apply to wildfire or flood events where we're activating the EOC and Emergency Management BC is involved, and so major events like we've seen in 2021. This community cleanup event policy is really just for local organized cleanup events from, for example, Pinatan Lake is an societies and a group that has approached us several times in the past through Director Rothenberger. And so that's the kind of event that this policy applies to. The changes have been fairly, it's obviously a very short policy. The changes are quite minor. We changed the definition with regards to the title, my title as general manager now instead of director. So that was a housekeeping amendment. The first section under the policy is unchanged, and that refers to the process where if a community group or a municipality or director is asking that we open a solid waste facility, an eco depot or transfer station beyond normal operating hours to accommodate an event, that's what that first section covers. And it basically says we need some advance notice, and then the requesting party covers that cost of that. That, to my knowledge, hasn't even actually occurred recently. I think it's something that was perhaps more common in years past. So the more significant item that we've added here is the clarification of criteria with regards to essentially waiving tipping fees for these community events. And so there's 4 points listed there, simple, pretty straightforward. The events need to be held, organized by a nonprofit or society in good standing. The material that we take under these events, must be permitted under the solid waste bylaw. It's also, the material needs to be collected from Crown property, road right-of-ways, the public waterfront like lake shores or parks, that sort of thing. And it must not benefit a private individual or business. So we just wanted to add this additional information for clarity to the officials, staff, and the public in terms of when we can accommodate a request like this. The other change, it's not in the policy, but in terms of how we offset the cost or cover the cost for these events in the past, it was not uncommon for EA directors to cover the cost of these events, the tipping fees under discretionary funds. But we also had this component of our legal dumping program funding allocated to this type of event as well. So we're trying to use just that source of revenue, or sorry, the budgeting item in terms of how we're going to cover the cost of these going forward. And operationally, there's some changes in terms of the folks that are requesting this will receive eco card numbers via letter. They don't actually need the cards themselves. And so it simplifies the process as well. So Adriana could speak to those details. She's on the line here as well. But that's about it. So fairly straightforward update in terms of these events, and just want to make sure that going forward, that anytime these things happen, that the benefiting parties meet all the requirements. So that's it.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I see we have a couple of questions already. Director Stamer and then Director Rothenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What kind of a timeline do you need for a heads up on this happening? Is it a month or 2 months? How long do you need to make sure that all the ducks are in a row?
Sorry, if I could just clarify, Director Stamer, is the question regarding additional hours at a facility or simply waiving of fees?
Well, both, in as much as if there was going to be a community cleanup, and also I didn't get a chance to maybe ask. It's not really a policy question as much as the free days. Is that an option coming back as well?
Okay, yeah. So the first part of the question, if there are additional hours are being requested, in other words, say the facility is not scheduled to be open on one specific day, and it's being requested that we open a facility, the minimum notice for that is 3 weeks. In terms of simply asking to have the fees waived, we haven't specified it in the policy. That's something we can generally turn around in a matter of a few days, so fairly short notice. Anytime these community events are being organized, they're typically known fair bit longer than that in advance, and we typically get those requests like a week or two in advance, and so we've always been able to accommodate that. So it's really more just about clarification and confirming eligibility and that sort of thing. The last part of your question, Director Stamer, with regards to free disposal days and the events that were held previously in like an annual event, that's obviously not, that's separate from this policy. And at this point, there's not any discussion or contemplation of changing the decision made at the board meeting last year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Rothenberger.
Thanks. It's an important distinction to make between a request to hold a community cleanup and waive fees versus extending hours. I'm not aware, well, maybe it's happened in other parts of the region, but I'm not actually aware of any situation where hours have been extended for a community cleanup. And Jake mentioned the one up at Pinnaton. Actually, it's Paul Lake that has an annual cleanup, and it's a lakeshore cleanup to get flotsam and jetsam out of the lakeshore at Paul Lake, and it's a great little event, but it's somewhat flexible as to when they're able to organize it, and it's done through the community association. So sometimes notice can be a bit short. In that case, there's never been a question of extending hours, but the process has been to, the community association asks me to get approval. I go to Jake and get the okay and get it set up and get a letter, which is then I provide to the organizers of the cleanup, and they're able to to copy it for 2 or 3 of the members who are driving trucks that day and so on, so that when they arrive at the transfer station, everything goes smoothly. Is that still going to be the process, Jake, or are you looking at changes there? Will it still be done simply by letter or some other way? Because I know we've also shifted the process a little bit over time.
Yes, we have shifted it a little bit. The requesting parties can contact us directly. The Tnrd contact us. There's on the website, there's a garbage and recycling contact information, or they can just email or phone us directly, however they prefer. The process is that we will basically take the request and collect the information about the event and confirm eligibility. So that's the first key step. And assuming that it's all eligible, then the staff will assign specific Eagle card numbers and generate what we call a fee dismissal letter and provide that directly to the requesting party. And we can obviously copy the EA director so they're aware that that's happening and that that's been supported. And if it wasn't supported, we'd let you know as well, obviously, if there was some issue with regards to society status or something, just hypothetically having encountered that. But yeah, so there's a bit of a change that, in other words, the requesting party can come straight to us. We'll collect the information. We'll respond with a letter. The letter, instead of before referring to a discretionary account from the EA directors, instead it will specifically have identified EcoCard numbers, which the attendant will receive the letter and identify those charges to those EcoCard numbers. So that's our way, because we have a whole new EcoCard system now at our facilities. It kind of jives in terms of that process. It works well.
An EcoCard system that isn't working yet, but nevertheless, it's good to have one. So yeah, it sounds like you're cutting out the middle person, i.e. the electoral area director. So I'll no longer have to get a letter done on letterhead and I sign it and send it along. So that'll be done directly through staff.
Yeah, instead, yeah, we'll no longer be charged to your discretionary account. So there'll be zero impact there. So no specific authorization or letter required from the EA director, but happy to keep you informed and copy you on the fee dismissal letter that's sent to the applicant. So,
Yeah, great, thank you.
yeah. Adriana, do you have anything you want to add on that? Yeah, Adriana has been around here much longer than I and may be able to comment on your question, Mel, about the history there with extending hours and requests for additional time.
Thank you, Jake. Yeah, I can chime in quickly. That covers it with the revision in the procedure. So we'll still go with the letter system, just the reference in the letter will be different. And if you did want to talk a little bit more about the eco card system at Paul Lake, Director Rothenberger, I can speak some more with you about that. We have had some challenges there, but they should be using that mobile device to process the cards now. So if you have an update, we can talk about that afterwards, but I would like to connect on that if you can.
That was just a smart ass remark about the fact that at our transfer station, they aren't working yet. And we're still either being just waved through or, you know, we show the card and that's fine. Yeah, so I gather there are some glitches to work out, are there?
I'm surprised to hear you say that actually. So I would like to chat some more about that.
All right.
All right, thank you very much to staff for making yourselves available for this. Are there any further questions on the policy before us today? And if not, there is a recommendation to the committee. Moved by Director Roden, seconded by Director Schaefer. Any further discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried unanimously. And that brings us to the end of our agenda. Is there any new business for today? The only item I had is that I believe our next meeting for the Policy Review Committee is March 23rd, 2022 at 10 a.m. And can you confirm that, Ms. Campbell?
That is correct. That gives us lots of time to work on these policies that we're going to be bringing to you.
Fantastic. So we will see you in a couple of months and motion to adjourn. Thank you. Have a great weekend, everyone.